In this video, we'll be demonstrating the process of taking ekonte to the layout or first key stage, layout to daiichi genga in Japanese. It's a bit confusing, but in the anime pipeline, there's no completely separate step for the background layout. The layout and the roughs of all the keyframes happen at the same time by the animators. After the ekonte is finished, the Inshutsu will present the finished ekonte to the animation staff so that they understand the intent. The main purpose of the meeting is to explain how they want the cuts transferred from the ekonte drawings to the layout drawings, and if there's any changes that they want to make from the ekonte to the layout stage, they can explain it in this meeting. Before the meeting, cut assignments will have been made in negotiations with the production staff. The production manager makes a document breaking down all the cuts up into blocks. This is known as wari furi hyo. They also create a document detailing what characters are in what cuts, with what weapons, tools, etc. This is known as kouban hyo. It is used to decide which model sheets are given to the animators. Here are the cut assignments that we've determined for the purposes of this video. Since we don't have an animation staff, for the purposes of this series of demonstrations, I'll be continuing my role as the Inshutsu, and Will be playing the part of the animation team and the animation director. The Inshutsu will sometimes draw layout along with the animation staff, so I will be taking on some of the workload as the Inshutsu. After the animation team is informed on their tasks, it's time for them to get started with drawing. First thing I want to talk about before we go cut by cut into the layout phase is this template we've built for this project. You all can decide if you want to follow along with us and use this template. This template is still a work in progress though, so we will likely refine it as we use it throughout the process. The first feature of this template, we have an animation folder for every step of the process pre-built into the Layers panel. This is from ekonte all the way to doga. We will be staying in this program all the way up to before the coloring stage. We also have our colored key predetermined and optimized for digital genga through doga work. All the animation folder layers seen on the timeline here are grouped under 2D camera, which will allow us to include camera work as part of genga, as well as giving written instructions to compositing. For the drawing area, we have notation for the cut and scene number, as well as a place for the title. We've included peg holes at the top in case we need to bring in some scanned drawings or print anything out. Cut 1. In the opening cut, I really wanted to show a lot of Emily's bedroom, so this meant that the layout was pretty important to properly delivering the scene in the layout stage. I had to come up with a lot of little details in the room. Bedrooms are very important for character design and can show a lot about who a person is. I don't have to be super precise with the drawing part of this stage, because the background artist will paint in all the fine details, but including things like a how anime is made book on her desk as an important detail is something I should include here. At the top of the layout paper here, I've labeled the drawing with the title of the animation, the cut number, and the total time of the cut in seconds plus frames. Since there isn't much action in this scene, most of the motion's being done by sliding the desk book and moving the camera in a pan/truck up. I've notated the pan truck up with 2 red squares showing the framing and labeling them with position A and position B, using an arrow to show the direction of the pan. For the slide notation, I took the outline of the desk and labeled them position 1 and position 2, coloring them red and green respectively to help make it easier to see. The cells and books are labeled starting with the furthest back and counting toward the camera. Notice how the bookshelf is labeled Book 1 and the desk Book 2. Same goes for the cells, but letters are used. Emily sleeping is labeled A, and the alarm clock is labeled B. For the animation here, I've drawn 2 frames for Emily breathing. I've left a lot of work to the doga artists here. They will have to make up a lot of the drawings, but I figured it might be okay since it's just a smooth breathing motion. For the alarm clock, I went ahead and drew all the frames for this animation. It has to be animated on ones, which means 24 drawings every second, because I wanted the alarm clock to look like it was shaking violently. If I didn't animate this on ones, I would have had to use a smear or blur to make the effect convincing. If I messed up anywhere in the notations, I will find out in the Sakan check stage in the next video. As an animator, I would be considered still in training, quote unquote, so mistakes for me at this stage might be forgiven. If I weren't in training though, mistakes could cost me my job. Here on the timesheet, I've labeled the top with the project title, scene number, cut number, time, animator name, and sheet number. Here on the action column, I've labeled where I want cells to go in their stacking order, and when I want them to appear in the timeline. Note how I've labeled where the books go. There's no timing information for books, so I just need to notate where they are in the layers, so the compositing staff knows where they should put them in the layer order. On both A and B, I've got them holding for the majority of the beginning. Since the camera is moving, I don't really need to have Emily move. When the camera starts to end is when I start her breathing animation. Here in the camera section, I've notated the pan/truck up alongside the book slide since the motions happen at the same time. I can apply them to the same line on the timesheet. Since I've only made 2 keyframes for Emily's breathing animation, I need to notate where I want the in-betweens to go. This is notated by the little tick marks on the sheet. I decided to animate on 3s since it's a really slow, steady motion. You can see here where I've notated the alarm clock animation. This is a pretty good visual of what I mean when I say that it's animated on 1s. At the bottom, I put a thick line and some scribbles to notate the end of the cut. Now let's take a look at cut 2. Cut 2 was a bit tricky because I had to imply a lot of the motion that was happening. I'm likely going to rely on the sound effects to sell this cut. To start the cut, I have the motion happening in the blanket to imply that she's moving the blanket. I also have her shadow moving across the floor to show that she's scooting up in the bed to follow the blanket. When she's done scooting, I have her legs swing down to imply that she's pivoting on the bed to set her feet on the floor. I will find out after I get this back from the animation director checks if I sold this motion or not. I have 3 cell layers here, A being the blanket, B being the left foot, and C being the right foot. The reason for this separation is because I have holds happening on each of these at different times. If you want to hold part of a cell, there's 2 ways to do it. One, by splitting the cells onto separate layers, which works well for cuts with unconnected drawings, and the other is called gosei, or partial hold, which I won't go into detail about yet, but it involves splitting a single cell into multiple layers. We might do actually an entire video on how to do gosei, but just splitting the motion into 3 cells seemed to be the simplest solution here. Something you might be wondering at this point is why are some of the numbers in circles and some of them are in triangles? This is a good thing to wonder. If you see a cell with a circled number, it means that it is a keyframe. This means that the doga artist will need to trace exactly as it is drawn on the keyframe. If it has a triangle surrounding it, it's what's called a doga guide. It's a rough outline that helps the doga artist accurately depict the motions intended by the genga artist. Doga guides are often used when the motion is irregular or not completely obvious. For the background layout of this cut, I just wanted to show the side of the bed and imply a texture on the wood floor.
Cut 3. For this cut where she's brushing her teeth, I wanted to embellish a bit on the details and composition, so I added some foreground elements to make it seem like the camera is inside her medicine cabinet. They're made with separate layers so I can specify different levels of blur for each of them. Each cell is labeled in letters starting from A at the lowest, and then going up from there. Books are labeled with numbers, starting at 1 for the bottom layer and counting up. I went with a simple 2-key loop with 2 breakdowns for overlapping action on the hair. This helps the motion have a flow to it, and hopefully overall looks less robotic. Flipping through all the necessary layout material we have, we start with the background, labeled with location and with text labels for any parts that aren't explicitly obvious what they are from the drawing. A cell 1. Because it's a key, it is circled. I've also labeled the character next to the key number, so later staff can be sure it's the right character, and so that they can easily find which character sheet to refer to. For layout, a frame with all of the cut elements combined together is handed in, so the interested can check the overall composition and layer work more easily. Cells are labeled with a pale yellow color, and books are shaded in with purple, green, or pink. This makes it obvious which parts are cleaned up by animators, and which parts go to the background staff for coloring. Next, we have the first breakdown, A2. This is also called an in-between reference, nakawari sanko in Japanese. These are labeled with a triangle around the key number, and are used when drawing a complete key isn't necessary. These are treated as incomplete reference drawings by the doga artist, and should be cleaned up and adjusted to be consistent with the keys. Next, we have the second keyframe, A3, which is also circled. Most of the shadows are the same, so only parts that change, or parts that the layout artist deems necessary, are added at this phase. Then comes A4, the second breakdown that loops the animation from A3 back to A1. Since A4 is the last key on this cell, It also has an end mark, so it's obvious to people checking the material that this is the last key in the sequence, and they didn't lose any of the frames somewhere. Next is Book 1, a bar on the medicine cabinet, and after that, B1, for a mug used to hold toothpaste and one of those weird floss stick things. This is labeled as a hold, tome in Japanese, which means it's the only frame in the B cell, and also that it doesn't move. Next up is a quick review of the timesheet. Title, scene, cut number, time, keyframer's name, page number, and total pages. The blurs on the foreground elements I talked about earlier are written here in the memo section. Book 1 plus B cell, bokeh. I've also specified how heavy I want the effect. Strong in this case. Then we get to the action column, which the keyframer also fills out. Here you can see I've written in Book 1, which is sandwiched between the character on cell A and the cup on cell B. I then fill in the timing I want for the A cell with dots for the in-betweens, and then I write in repeat in katakana at the end here. This means that the frames written up to that point will loop until the end of the cut. For the B cell, I've written in B1 and labeled it as a hold with a vertical line down the column. Anytime a frame is held for 4 frames or more, it should be noted on the timesheet with a vertical line. Lastly, I've drawn a bunch of thick lines at the 2 seconds and 12 frames mark to show the end of the cut. And that's it for cut 3.
Cut 4. This was probably the easiest out of all the cuts I had to do. Essentially, I've just drawn a layout and notated with WXP where effects and compositing need to put a fog effect. The rest will be left up to the background artist. Originally, I was going to make the curtain be a book, the silhouette a cell, and have water animation for the shower. But when you're working on anime, something you always have to keep in mind is how you can reduce the workload. With tight deadlines, you can't always make everything into a complicated masterpiece of animation. Having some cuts with little to no animation can be critical for productions that want to have some scenes be complex, layered, smoothly animated scenes. For the timesheet on this one, I filled at the top as normal, and have just left a note here in the memo for the compositing staff that WXP is a fog effect. Since there's no layers or animation in this cut, the rest of the sheet is left blank.
Cut 5. Tying the ponytail. I actually struggled with this cut quite a bit. Going through the materials from the start, we have the background. I've noted the main light sources and the time of day so that the background painter knows what colors and shadow direction to use. I drew the angle as if the character were standing outside of her shower door looking at a mirror. A1. Again, I've opted for this drawing to be the cleanest of the bunch, with the overall shadows that will be added onto all of the keys in second key drawn in here. A2. The second key in the sequence. She reaches up and towards her other hand to tie the ponytail. A3, 4, and 5. Here, she's reaching to her hair tie on the right wrist and grabbing it. And in A6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, she's pulling the end of the ponytail through the tie and leaning forward slightly. A11, 11.5, and 12. Here she's releasing the hair tie and moving her head back up. I have 11.5 as a breakdown because almost all of the forms can be drawn by in-betweening A11 and A12, while shifting some of their parts like the angle of the head as it moves back to create overlapping action. Don't forget to mark the end of your cells. Next is the pan notation. Here I've specified a pan from camera position A to position B. They're both outlined in red and connected with an arrow to show the direction of the pan. Next, I have the slide notation for the A cell. To create the illusion of depth, I slide the A cell in the opposite direction of the pan. In this case, the slide is about a quarter the length of that of the pan, but it can vary depending on the distance from the camera and the effect that you want. For cells and books, the slide positions are indicated by outlining the cell or book in each position that it slides or zooms to, and then connecting them with an arrow. Here's the cut without the slide. And again with it. See the difference? The one with the slide has a faux 3D effect, which is used in a lot of anime. Now for the timesheet again. Title, scene, cut, time, keyframer's name, pages, and total pages. It's repetitive, but it has to be filled out for every cut. In the memo section, I decided to put a background blur, specified as weak, and I've also written the notation for the slide for the A cell that goes from position 1 to position 2, and the pan that I drew a notation to go from position A to position B. In the action section, I have all of the timing filled out, with dots for the drawings that will be in between, and in the camera section, I've written in the positions on the timesheet that the camera will move from A to B, as well as when the A cell moves from position 1 to position 2. In this case, the pan and slide are both for the entire duration of the cut. This line with 2 triangles at the start and end is the standard notation for slides, pans, track ups, track outs, digital track ups, digital track backs, quick track backs, quick track ups, and maybe a few other movements that I'm not remembering right now. Again, at the bottom, I've drawn lines at the 2.5 second mark to show where the cut ends. And that's it for cut 5.
Cut 6. This is by far the most difficult cut that I was assigned, but I was up for the challenge. Character animation is one of the hardest things to manage in anime because of the critical component of staying on model. In anime, you have dozens of animators drawing the same character, and it's very important for the character to have continuity between frames. In this cut, I've got a slide taking place to make the camera pan more convincing and to add depth to the scene. I've notated it in the same manner as previous slides, and I've got a camera pan which is notated as A position and B position with an arrow to show direction. Something that we haven't talked about yet and you're probably wondering is, what do these colors mean on the cells? It can vary from studio to studio, but typically red lines denote highlight outlines, blue lines denote shadow outlines, and black lines are almost always the cell outlines. The fill colors are there to clarify where the shadows need to be to the coloring staff and to let the doga artists know where the shadows need to be on their in-betweens. I have a few timing charts in here as well. This is instructions for the doga artists so that they can know where they need to position the in-betweens relative to the position of the motion in the keyframes. This chart, for example, would mean that the in-betweener needs to have one breakdown in the middle of position A3 and A2, and an in-between in the middle of the breakdown and A3. On the last frame here, I'm doing a gosei, or partial hold, something I mentioned earlier. I want Emily to grin at the end here, but I don't want the doga artist to have to copy or retrace the same frame when a partial hold to be more time efficient. Here I've notated this frame with Hoka A San Gosei, which means that this frame should be a continuation of cell A3, but with a part of the cell becoming a new layer and changing. In this case, that would be the mouth and the arm. I'm very positive that I was off model with this cut, and I will be able to see where I went wrong when this moves into Sakkan check, or animation director check. For this timesheet, I filled it out similarly to how I filled out the first cut that I was assigned, with the A pan and A cell slide happening at the same time, and then I've got the animation notation on the A column in the timesheet. Cut 7. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to complete this last cut, as you might have guessed from our intro. We will have this cut finished for future videos, and we might even make a whole video on that cut, since it used some pretty complex camera work and notation. This concludes our video on layout and keyframing for Japanese animation. If you liked our video, please give us a like, subscribe, and consider supporting us on Patreon if you'd like to see us make more content more frequently. Our next video in this series will be about animation checks. We hope to get it out in June, but we do tend to underestimate the workload on these videos. Also, our affiliated website Sakuga Foundry has started doing a monthly animation challenge called Animating, or Anime Monthly. If you are struggling to find inspiration and motivated to get drawing, you might try this challenge out. Also, being part of a community of animators and having people look forward to seeing your creations is a great way to get some animation under your belt and get useful critical feedback. Thanks to all our Patreon supporters for helping make this content possible.